Good evening, sir. Welcome to the Football Book Corner podcast. To give it its full title, Mr. Paul Whittle, author of the month. But before you talk about your wonderful book, Before the Premier League: A History of Football League's Last Decades, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into writing football books.
Well, thank you for having me on. First of all, it's a pleasure to be on. It's from a lifelong love of football, playing and watching as a kid, and just really being obsessed with everything about the game. For me, that was from the very late 70s, early 80s, and just that continued. I continued playing. Watching various teams at first, and then my dad started taking me to Oldham Athletic in the early 80s, so that was my team. Got a few good years, and it's not been great since. And really, maybe about 10 years ago, I wasn't playing football anymore. Legs had gone, and I was reading quite a bit of football history, which I'd always been interested in. And I sort of had this idea for a book from the period really that I'd grown up with initially, and just had sort of different ideas, trying to get it into a good format. And this was what ended up as Before the Premier League. And then I started doing a blog as well, which I've really enjoyed. That's at the 1888 letter, just looking at different games and tournaments and different bits of football history. Mainly English football league, but some international as well. Gone on Facebook and Twitter, just posting old, football anniversaries, birthdays, things like that, old matches. And yeah, I've really enjoyed doing the book and got that out last year. And some people seem to enjoy it when they read it, which is the main thing for me. I didn't really have any idea that it was going to be a bestseller or anything like that. I'm just glad to have done it, and hope the people who do read it enjoy it.
I do apologise because you have sent it me. I haven't read it yet, but it is almost like a Before the Premier League Bible, and there's some great interviews as well. What I like about the book, flicking through, you go through the decades, and there's some lovely interviews at the back, and there's a lot of facts. Like, for instance, Division 1 leading goal scorers, Tony Browne from 70-71, Francis Lee 71-72. I love things like that. I think that when you're writing books, them factual informations about the players that achieved notoriety, it's great to write about them, but it's great to have them facts: who scored the goals and who was the first of this and that and the other, and you go back in time and up to date, and there's some fabulous photographs in there as well. I love that one, Sealand Road, Chester, early 1990s. I mean, what a dump that was, wasn't it? You got all looks like buddleia growing out of the stands, and they clearly wasn't playing football back then. They'd moved on. But, for the newbie football fan, all they see is these lovely, modern, all-seater stadium, but us older guys know that football wasn't like that back in the day.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, with everything, it's a balance as well.
Yeah.
I wanted some stats to be in there. In fact, at first I had quite a few more.
You're just breaking up a little bit, Paul.
Yeah, at first I had more stats, but I've just sort of I took a few out and just sort of got it to what I thought was a nice level, just to balance the rest of the book out. I really enjoyed doing the interviews. I got a good span of players right through from the early 60s up to the Premier League era, players that had played all through, players that played in different divisions, and they're basically giving them the chance to relate their experiences in the game. And yeah, the pictures as well. I contacted a few people because I just wanted a few to, capture some of that atmosphere. And as you say, the old terraces and a lot of the grounds that have either gone completely or have been changed, beyond recognition. Those are just some of the changes that we've seen in that time.
I love the longest sequence of consecutive scoring, 15 in 12 games. Bill Prendergast for Chester, 38-39 season. Longest unbeaten sequence, Nottingham Forest, 42 games. Hat tricks there, Dixie Dean, 37. Tranmere, Everton, Notts County, and England. And Division 1 in one season post war, Jimmy Greaves, 6. Chelsea, 1960-61. No wonder Tony Curry was in tears when Jimmy Greaves left. I mean, Jimmy was just a one-off and the greatest player that we've ever seen. Youngest football league players, oldest football league players. You cover everything before the Premier League, and I think it's fantastic to have that all down in a book that people can purchase, that can read, and can remember, because those days should never be forgotten. I know that the modern game would like to eradicate all records and pretend that football did start in 1992. But as you've alluded to in your book, it was 1888 was the first football league, and we should never ever forget that.
No, absolutely. I've tried to do that justice. It's a long history. I didn't feel I was quite able to cover the whole history from 1888. I've more or less
Yeah,
taken it. I've gone into it post-war, and
yes,
then really from about 58, I really concentrate on it when it became the four national divisions. So for me, it's sort of going from there. Um, the abolition of the minimum wage being a really massive thing that basically led to where we are now, and then just going through 60s, 70s, 80s, as you say, and looking at the major developments, the things that changed in television, and obviously the way that money changed the game, and different experiences of watching the game. The stadiums have changed, so much has changed, and yeah, it's definitely trying to do that justice. And we get frustrated when people talk about records since 1992,
yeah.
when there's over 100 years before that as you say, should never be ignored. And I'm just trying to bring some of that back, particularly that period that I remember growing up, that I think is often, the 80s are just seen as a grim time of hooliganism, low crowds, English clubs out of Europe. But I think there was a lot more going on there. There was a lot more competition in the league, and it wasn't. It was getting that way, but it wasn't totally dominated by money. And I'm just trying to, as I say, do justice to that period of English football.
Absolutely. A lovely picture of you on the back, born in Leeds at the start of the 73-74 season. Paul spent much time playing and watching football ever since, and he writes about the game's history at all the W's. The 1888 letter.com. This is his first book. When's your second? And who's the pictures? Why the pictures on the front? And I says to Andy, I love the iconic brown football with the laces in it.
Yeah, I wanted to get that, and yeah, the picture of me. There's a few of me to choose from for football, so I just thought I'd get something in there. That's probably late 70s as well. And the ones on the front, there's one of Roker Park, which
Yeah.
fantastic old ground. And that was taken by a chap that I know, John Dewhurst, who's also an author, writes a lot about Bradford football history.
Mm,
And this is from his own collection. He took quite a few during the 80s, so that's fantastic stand and ground that's now gone. And the second one was kindly provided to me by James Court, and that was actually taken by his dad, and that's at Molineux, but a very different looking Molineux.
isn't it
Uh,
just?
Very early 90s, from the away terrace, big old terrace, looking out over the rest of the ground, which isn't in the best condition, to be fair
Mm.
to it. But there were two great pictures that people kindly provided to me, that they'd taken themselves, or were family photographs, which are from that era.
And I think the Molyneux is a great example of the modern game, how it's changed. Because, as you said, they moved out, Sunderland moved out, Roker Park went to Stadium of Light. Many teams have moved out of grounds and gone to uh, pretty similar stadiums out of town. But the Wolves have stayed there at Molineux, And that picture is a fantastic example of how bad Wolves were then at that time, and how far that one stand was away from the football pitch. I mean, I know the West Ham fans ain't very happy at London Stadium, although at the moment they're quite happy because they're winning. But you did need binoculars to sit in that stand on the side of the Molyneux back in those days, didn't you?
Yeah, it's very, very bizarre, isn't it? They ran into some financial problems.
Yeah.
I think they wanted to move the whole ground in that direction and ran out of money.
Mm.
So yeah, it does look very, very strange. Quite a lot of teams, Chelsea at that time as well, also had big problems and also had one, brand new stand, but the rest of the ground was not looking so great. Yeah, I think it's a real shame when teams move and lose all that
Yeah.
history. Sometimes you understand it, but as you say, a lot of the stadiums just look the same. They don't have the same feel to them. They don't have the history, and often they don't have the same atmosphere. I think those are all things that can be lost.
Absolutely, and I think as well, what shouldn't be lost is lots of the football clubs, they had to sell their better players to finance stadium developments, whether it be a stand or the entire ground. And I think that when you look at Ipswich Town, a great example, you look at where they are today, that they sold so many players to finance Portman Road. Okay, yeah, they stayed there, but at what cost? And I know for a fact that Chelsea, to finance the East Stand in the 70s, they sold Alan Hudson and Peter Osgood. And it was an ongoing thing where clubs didn't have the greatest of, shall we say, business acumen, because when Alan Hudson was sold from Stoke City to Arsenal, that was as a direct result of the Butler's Lane stand falling down in the high winds in January 76, and Alan had to be sold because that stand wasn't insured. Wouldn't happen today.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was a real shame actually for Stoke, who had a
Mm,
great team at the time. I think Peter Shilton and Jimmy Greenhoff were also sold as a direct result as well. Yeah, yeah. It was, in some ways that's a nice thing that clubs weren't quite so corporate and so business orientated. But yeah, I think they could be a little bit naive as well with that. And again, it's a balance. Obviously they want to be able to make money and compete, but I think sometimes modern football's obsessed with that um, more than anything, and to me it takes a little bit away from the game that the richest clubs are always at the top and always winning. And you mentioned Ipswich Town. They were one of the best teams in the country, unlucky not to win the league, challenging for trophies. You know, without a big budget. Just good management under Bobby Robson. Put together a good set of players, and you'd get that so much more, wouldn't you? With
yeah.
in the 70s, especially Derby and Nottingham Forest winning league titles. It's hard to imagine that happening now. You need a billionaire or mega billionaire to compete.
Yeah, it's almost an unrecognisable game. I love on page 56, progress of the British transfer record 61 to 92, June 61, Jerry Chin's Villa to Inter Milan. £85,000. I mean, it's just laughable, isn't it, when you look at the prices now of while this window is open, and you can buy any. I don't really want to seem disrespectful, but in the Premier League, any average Joe for about 25 million. And like in those days, you got an absolute world class superstar for 85 grand. It's just bizarre. And 61, of course, wasn't that long ago.
No, no. Relatively speaking, I mean
Mm,
the wages as well as the transfer fees have just exploded, as we know. That it's just unimaginable from a time when even the best players, they weren't getting paid that much more than people in other
yeah,
professions, people in good jobs. And I think the fans related more to the players then, and now they're just totally removed. They're obviously celebrities, they're superstars, and you can't blame the players so much
yeah.
because who's going to turn that down? That's just the way it's gone. But I think it has removed some of that connection that fans had to players. And obviously there was a time when, they really weren't paid enough. When
Yeah.
yeah, when the clubs had the maximum wage, they were able to basically keep players on a pittance. So again, it's that thing of balance that it changed, but then it just went further and further away from, I think, what was intended to keep a balance of the league and prevent a certain number of clubs just being that much bigger and richer than everyone else, that they were going to dominate the league. And I think we see now that's what happens. When the money's totally uncontrolled, and you see smaller clubs, falling by the wayside. Macclesfield and Bury in recent years, Oldham have been on the brink of that
Mm.
for basically a Premier League player's couple of weeks' wages. You can't help feeling that's sort of gone too far, really.
Absolutely. And Oldham being now, of course, non-league and are the first club to hit, well, I wouldn't say hit that status. You know, it's been a race to the bottom, hasn't it, really, sadly, for Oldham Athletic. But the first team that played in the Premier League to play now non-league football, it just is incredible how that team, I mean, that wonderful side under Joe Royal and done so very, very well, is now as a non-league football team, well, club. How long did this labour of love take you?
It took quite a few years actually, to get it really in a format that I was happy with.
Yeah,
Um, I, I mean, my main inspiration for it was found a book by R.C. Churchill, which was called 60 Seasons of League Football, which actually went up to
you
19,
just you're
1888
just
to
breaking up
19.
again. You're just breaking up. You're going a bit Dalek like Terry Curran used to in the old days of the Curran View.
I'll just go back to that. So my main inspiration for the book was a book that I found by someone called R.C. Churchill, which
Yeah,
was 60 Seasons of League Football, which took it right from the start, 1888 up to 1958, and it sort of looked at the periods of the league in chunks divided by the world wars, but it had a lot of statistics for each club. And initially, I had in mind something like that, and I had more statistics, as I say, but a lot of it's on the internet. A lot of it maybe people can find in other places. So I left them in. I left in a sort of section, as you've mentioned, which I think is important as well, but maybe a bit less emphasis on that and more on the interviews, which I wasn't expecting when I started the book. A friend of mine, so we had a chat about the book generally, and he was saying, well, if you could get a couple of interviews, that'd be great. But I didn't really know how to go about it initially. But my friend who actually works for the FA put me in touch initially with Paul Davis,
yeah,
which was a fantastic way to start. League title winner, well, won virtually everything in the English game, um, and also Nigel Gleghorn, who had a great experience at different clubs, 500 odd games, and he'd started as a fireman, which I enjoyed hearing about. Went basically straight from the fire service to the first division, which is unheard of these days, and they were great interviewees. And from there, I was able to get in touch with a couple more people after that. So I got this nice balance, half a dozen players who played at different levels of the football league and all had, great experiences. Played at different clubs. Some of them had played in the North American League, which is quite interesting to hear about as well. So that part of it came maybe in the last couple of years. Paul Davis, I think I interviewed just before the first lockdown. I actually went to St George's Park to meet him, which was also quite an experience. Um, and then after that, I was able to put it together reasonably quickly and get it out last year. So I mean, it's hopefully something that'll stand the test of time as well. It's not sort of limited to, to 2021 or 2022. It's meant to be a history that's there to to either remind those of us who were there and maybe introduce people who weren't around to, you know, a little slice of how English football was before then.
Steve, I'm not familiar with this fella. Steve Hetze.
Steve Hetzke, yeah, he'd had a long career. Never played at the top level, but he'd spent quite a long time with Reading,
Yeah,
moved on to Blackpool, and then he played for Sunderland under Laurie McMenemy, which wasn't their best period, unfortunately. And he finished at Chester and then Colchester. And it's just interesting to hear from a player who didn't make the very top level, didn't make millions of pounds out of it, but he had a long career. He started very young. I think he was Reading's youngest ever player when he made his debut, and sort of talking about football in the 70s, how physical it was, some of the changes, and he's still involved also coaching and scouting and got involvement in the game. So he's got sort of a perspective on some of those changes that we've been talking about. And it's just interesting to me, he's talking about different managers. Jock Wallace was his manager at the end of his career, obviously Laurie McMenemy earlier than that. Maurice Evans at Reading, different characters that I've obviously heard and read about, but to hear a bit more about their styles and how players respond to different managers, it's really interesting to me as a fan.
absolutely. And he played for Vancouver Whitecaps in the NASL in 1976. But I love the reference to Billy Whitehurst. And another player you're at Reading, Robin Friday. I mean, two legends of the Football League. Billy Whitehurst, without any fear of doubt, the hardest man that's ever played football. And Robin Friday, one of the greatest Mavericks. Lots of people would have heard of the name but don't know who Robin Friday was. But I mean, if you could put a player's um, career and life on the silver screen, Robin Friday would be up there with the best of them, wouldn't he?
Yeah, he's got there's a couple of books on him alone as well, aren't there? He's
Yeah,
one of
there
those
is.
characters that you just don't see in modern football, and that's something I mentioned in the book. And obviously you're talking regularly to Alan Hudson and Terry Curran, who are those sort of players that you really don't tend to come across. So many of them, Stan Bowles, uh, Tony Curry, and they, players who, and Robin Friday is interesting because he never again got right to the top level, but he's, like you say, he's sort of a legendary figure, isn't he? Cult figure
Yeah.
in the game, absolute maverick who maybe didn't, make the most of his talent, but very well remembered.
But it just goes to show, doesn't it, that there's been so many players that have played football through the years, and you don't have to actually hit the highest heights to be remembered. And Robin, you're right. There's a fantastic book, two parts, by Stuart Kane, who I've had the pleasure to do a podcast with, who wrote about and tells the story of Robin Friday. And some of those stories of Robin really are absolutely legendary.
Yeah, definitely things that you wouldn't get away with
No,
nowadays
no,
in
absolutely no.
football. Yeah,
Imagine that. Can you imagine though, on a serious note, lots of the things that our Mavericks and players did back in those days? You look at the wokeness of football today. They're just that there are, and I think as a consequence, we haven't got the charismatic players and the characters because it's been knocked out of them. Probably one of the few that we have got, thankfully, is Jack Grealish, who is a throwback to the olden days. Thank God we still need people like that to look up to, watch playing football, admire them, and thinking, "Go on, son, you're one of us."
yeah. I mean, that's what people want to see
Yeah.
generally when they're watching football as well. Someone who's going to do something a little bit different.
Mm.
And I think that there are. It'd be crazy to say there haven't been improvements.
Yeah.
The players are fantastic technically. They're obviously super fit. But if there was a criticism, it's that the game can be a bit stereotyped, that,
Yeah.
people play the same way, that they're obviously so well coached, everything's so well drilled. There doesn't seem to be as much room for that sort of spontaneity, those skills, those players doing things off the cuff that you used to see a lot more. I used to love watching Glenn Hoddle when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Fantastic passer of the ball, both feet. Ahead of his time really. Playing on terrible pitches, getting kicked about, and just had that extra level of skill that even not necessarily a fan of that team as a player, you'd think just amazing to watch. And there were a lot, there were a few of those around in um, John Barnes, Chris Waddle, obviously Gaz a little bit later on.
Mm.
There were those sort of players still around, and there just seemed to be less of them.
And another lovely thing that we used to have in those days that we don't have today, players staying at a football club for almost their entire career. Steve Bull was probably the last one, and Matthew Letizia also with Southampton, bringing it up to date. But we had players like Derek Parkin, who holds the most appearances at Wolverhampton Wanderers, Kenny Hibbitt second. We got Stevie Perryman at Tottenham Hotspur, Terry Payne at Southampton. These players done like over 700 games and playing at a good level of football as well. So it's something that you just wouldn't get today.
And I think it's another thing that the fans identified with a lot more as well, and especially in the lower divisions now, you get such a
Yeah,
turnover of players on short-term contracts
yeah.
that it's a different team almost every year.
Mm,
The longest-serving player will have been there, 2, 3 years, and it, you don't feel the same connection again. You don't feel the same bond as when you had those long-serving career players. Paul Davis spent the best part of 2 decades with Arsenal. David O'Leary alongside him, Steve Perryman, people that you've mentioned,
mm.
just seem to be a lot more widespread. Players staying basically for their career at the same club, and I don't know how much agents or the way contracts are negotiated have to do with it now, but it's another thing that you know seems to have lost a little bit of connection between fans and the clubs. The fact that the players move so often.
Absolutely. And at my club, we had a player, Jude Bellingham. I think he played about 20 games for Birmingham City, and we retired his shirt. Again,
Mm,
something that you look at,
yeah,
you just would never have had that back in the old days. It is just a bonkers game. And managers, you look at the sack race that you'll see on Sky TV. I mean, basically, in our day, the sack race was you'd turn up as a parent and you'd enter the sack race with your kids, and that's their way of like looking at mum or dad and having a right laugh. But the seriousness of it now is if you don't kick off a season, and shortly the teams will be kicking off a season, you lose your first 5 or 6 games in the Premier League, you're toast.
yeah. It's that short term thing, and the rewards are so great, but
Yeah.
also the danger if you get relegated that you're going to lose so much money. You're going to be stuck with players on the huge wages. Everyone's scared of that. So that, like you say, it's half a dozen games. I mean, is it Watford who seem to get through 4 or 5 managers a season? It's just crazy.
It just is bonkers, isn't it? For us older guys, it is absolutely crazy. In the olden days, you'd say that manager's been with us for 4 seasons. I mean, now they are with you for 4 seasons, but it's like August, spring, winter, and summer. Those are the
Yeah,
four
yeah.
seasons that you're with them. It's just absolutely crazy. How do you get any continuity? How do you get any stability in your football club when you keep sacking the managers? Sir Alex Ferguson, a prime example, started off at Manchester United, you could say not on a good footing, but they backed him, and look at the success that Sir Alex brought to Manchester United. Alex Ferguson wouldn't have been Sir Alex these days. He'd have probably lasted a few games that have sacked him.
Yeah, definitely.
It's mad.
By the late 80s, he'd have been gone, wouldn't he?
Yeah,
Had a couple of
definitely.
seasons where they they were nowhere in the league, didn't win anything.
Shankly done the
Yeah,
same as
and you'd
well
be
when he
gone.
started at
Yeah,
Liverpool. Never won nothing at first, but built great sides at Liverpool Football Club. And them two of the greatest football clubs in world football, possibly might not have happened had it not been for the brilliance of the management and the intelligence of the people that run the football clubs.
they tended to leave the manager to it to
Yeah, they did.
yeah, much more of an extent. I mean, a lot of the teams that are obviously mentioned in the book that are, the great teams of, certainly post-war English football, that you just associate them with the manager, don't you? Matt Busby at
Yeah,
Manchester
yeah.
United, Shankly at Liverpool, Revie at Leeds, Clough, well, both Derby and Forest. The great managers. I mean, Clough must be the last one to have, lasted that long at a single club.
Mm,
I hardly remembered a time when Clough wasn't the manager of
yeah.
Nottingham Forest, right up to the Premier League era, and that just, it doesn't seem to happen.
No,
Ferguson
absolutely.
obviously being the exception.
What does happen is the owners of football clubs like to get the football boots on and turn up at the training ground. I remember Ron telling me about Doug Ellis. What the hell's going on here? Like, he stuck him in the wall. He said to Sid, just fizz one past his right ear hole, and he soon buggered off. Then, well, again, you didn't have that. They owned or run the club and let the manager manage the football club and the players play. Everybody had the roles. These days, the owners seem to want to do absolutely everything.
The owners seem to be the sort of personalities in their own right, and
Yeah.
obviously there's a few chairmen. Ken Bates was notorious, Doug Ellis, as you mentioned,
Mm,
but they were the exception, really. I mean,
yeah.
for a long time, the chairmen, they were just the people who ran the club effectively.
Yeah.
They weren't
We
looking
didn't
for
we didn't
publicity.
know them, did we?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. We
Mm,
didn't know them. They were there to run the club as best they could, but leave the management to the manager. And now it seems a lot of them want the limelight. You know,
absolutely.
they're
Referees.
yeah.
Referees, another one as well, Paul. We didn't know who the referees were back in the day. We watched them. They had a black uniform on, they had a whistle, and they refereed it. Now they want to be stars. It's the only stars in football are the football players. When's your next book? And are you working on a next book?
I have to say, at the moment, I'm not working on the next book. It's something I maybe like to do in the future. I'd
Yeah.
have to have a really strong idea to put the time in, the research it takes. I really enjoyed this one
Mm,
because it's a labour of love. It's the
yes.
era I grew up with. It'd either be another angle on that or something else that really had my total commitment and interest. At the moment, I'm enjoying doing the blog, just researching different bits and pieces of football history. I've just done one about the 1982 World Cup, which is the first World Cup I remember as well.
Yeah.
I think had some great games, great memories from that. I just like picking up different bits and pieces of football history wherever I can, and doing a bit of research and doing a little feature on the blog is a good way to keep that ticking over. But I'm certainly not ruling out writing another one in the future.
Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. And finally, give another shout out to your website, to your social medias, and where people can go and buy your wonderful book, Before the Premier League, a history of the football leagues last decades. And guys, it is a beautiful little book. It's got everything in there. It's got interviews, there's lots of stories, there's lots of factual information. It's a book that you should be very, very proud of. And if I ever do a book, well, I won't because I'm not intelligent enough, but it would be something similar to your book in the way that you've written it, factual information, stories, and interviews as well. So well done, and thank you very much, Paul Whittle.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your kind words. And yeah, you can buy the book and also find a little bit more information about it on my blog, which is called The 1888 Letter. So it's at the1888letter.com/book. But the 1888letter.com's got different features anyway. That's my blog, mainly about same era, pre-Premier League English football. I'm on Twitter at 1888letter. and I'm on Facebook and Instagram at Before the Premier League.
Well done, mate. Superb. Be very, very proud of what you've done. Thank you so much for your time, and it's back to Andy now.
Thank you.
Cheers, pal. Appreciate it.
That's great.
Ta, mate. Speak soon.
Yeah, cheers, Paul.
Lovely. Thanks,
Thanks
Paul.
very much.
Keep in touch, mate. Thank you.
All the best.
Bye-bye now. Bye.